Okay, I will start the course. Hello, everybody. I hope everybody is in a good good condition, good health, and good spirit in this difficult times. Um, well, as you know, you have received the first three subtopics, which is already narrated, and I hope you have looked at it. Maybe not finished, but part of it maybe you have already listened and tried to understand. But we can discuss that if there is questions at the end of the course today. So we will start with subtopic 4. Two perspectives of social change, the social change as a process and social change as an interaction. And then we follow with globalization and localization. And then we close the session with the subtopic 6 about development. Okay, we can go straight to slide 5. Social change as process and as interaction. So social change can be studied and analyzed from two perspectives. Yeah? From the perspective of social change as a process and social change as an interaction. Yeah? The two perspectives, I will explain the two perspectives from two theory of development, two main theory of development, the theory of modernization. This theory of modernization look at development from the perspective of process. And social change that is from the perspective of interaction. I will explain it with by using the theory of dependency. Yeah. Okay. So we start with the first. Yeah. We see the slides here. Yeah. We start with theory of modernization. Yeah. That look at social change and development from the perspective of process. So from this perspective, development as a process, society is assumed to be an isolated social system. The analysis is analysis inside the society, as if it is an isolated entity, not in interaction with other community. And even if they include this relation with other communities, then the relation is more and subtle and harmonious, due to diffusion of cultural traits, cultural elements, from one society to the other society. So from this perspective, social change and development is seen as a process toward from a society which is more or less developed, more traditional, less developed, into a society which is more developed. And indicator for a developed society is its complexity. It is more complex. It is more differentiated, in all its aspects, its institutions, its technology, its economy, all these aspects of a society is more complex. So the process of development goes through from underdeveloped, less complex traditional society into a more developed, more complex, and more differentiated society. And what is also important is in the course of this development, of course, that these societies uh, need or requires different systems of integration, yeah? Different systems that bind the society as a united entity. Yeah? So, for example, in the past, it was maybe the kinship system that binds the people together. But now, because the kinship system is already disintegrated and eroded, yeah, the society needs another institution, yeah, that binds the society. Societies like Indonesia, it doesn't exist in the past. Indonesia exists because of colonialism. It exists because of colonialism, and before it is conglomerates of small kingdoms, small societies, yeah, that live independently. But colonialism um, unite this pluralistic situation into one colonial system, yeah, colonial what colonial political system. Yeah. When Indonesia gets its independent, one of the problem of the founding fathers of Indonesia, yeah, the political leaders at that time, was how to unite this pluralistic entity, how to unite it to become Indonesia. This is actually looking for a new system of integration. Yeah. People sometimes use the term nation building, yeah, uh, to describe it. For example, ideology, nationalism, yeah, as an ideology is one of um, system of integration that was created. Pancasila, for example, in Indonesia, and many other things, yeah, that was developed as a part of a system of integration. Okay, that is so. Uh, um, from this perspective, looking at social change, come the theory of modernization. Yeah. So, theory of modernization is represented actually the perspective of change as a process. Modernization theory is one of the most common theory that is used uh, by decision makers, politicians, also in the universities, academicians, etc. Although it is also one of the theories with the most critique, but in the daily life, it is one of the most important theories that influence people's decision making. You know? So modernization is defined as is the total transformation of traditional pre-modern society into the type of society with technology and social organization as in advanced society in the West, which are economically prosperous and politically stable. So, as already mentioned, yeah, modernization um, is about the transformation from a society which is more traditional, underdeveloped, into a society more developed, modern, yeah, that mimic actually the advanced and more developed countries in the West. So the West become an example of developed society. Yeah, you see here the a table, yeah, where you can see the different fields. Yeah, here. Oh, we got a bit background music. Maybe somebody has to mute its microphone.
It's microphone.
Okay,
Okay.
that is part of the creativity. Uh, we go further. So in the table, you see the areas or the field where modernization happened. Yeah, in the economic field, in the political, education, family, social stratification, and on the right side, you see what is expected when society become modern. Yeah, for example, in the economic field, yeah, it has to develop toward a science-based technology. Yeah? The agriculture has to be more commercial. Yeah? The industry more mechanization and industrialization. Urbanization is very important. Yeah? So urbanization, for example, become an indicator whether a society already developed or still less developed. Yeah? In the politics, for example, um, the acceptance and the growth of democracy become uh, an indicator. Yeah? It's interesting, of course, that we will talk when we talk about globalization. We come back to this democracy. You know? In many cases, democracy became adapted to become a different things when people what imported from the West. You know? Education, alphabetization, and development of science, that kind of things. The family, yeah? the the erosion and of kinship systems and the nuclear family that become the main what social organization at the lowest level, you know, where uh, reproduction is happen and where socialization of the new members of the society um, uh, happens. You know? And then also certification is very important, that there is a shift, yeah, from first social status that is based on ascriptive character. Yeah, ascriptive is a social status that you inherit when from your birth. Yeah? Like, for example, in society that is divided between the commons and the aristocracy, for example. You got your status from birth. If you born as a slave, then you become a slave, and so is your children and grandchildren, and so yeah, ascriptive status. If you born as an aristocrat, then you will become aristocrat. Yeah? Whether you are poor, you are stupid, or you are mad. Yeah, doesn't matter. Yeah, that will abolished, will be abolished, and a new social certification will develop based more on achievement. Yeah? So everybody actually can become anything. Yeah, like, for example, the American ideology. Newspaper boy that can become a millionaire, for example. Those are what rhetoric behind this new idea about social certification based on achievement, not ascriptive. Okay, Um, we can go further to the other perspective, the change and development seen from the perspective of interaction. That is a total different way of seeing social change and development. Yeah. According to this perspective, the former perspective based on the former perspective that see social change and development as a process doesn't fit with the fact that interaction between nations and countries often lead to dominance, yeah, of one towards the other. Yeah. We talk about then about intersocietal stratification. So much of development is based on this interaction between countries, and this interaction doesn't happen harmoniously and subtly. No, in many cases it happened with domination and exploitation. Yeah, so we are talking about intersocietal societal stratification. So stratification between people and nations, yeah? Stratification between northern hemisphere that dominate the southern hemisphere, for example. Yeah? So this perspective of interaction look at development and change from a total different perspective, from a different view. Yeah? And we go further, the domination and expansion of one nation generally hampers and disrupt the independent development of the dominated nation. Yeah. So development in one, for example, the development of the northern hemisphere, yeah, causes underdevelopment of the southern hemisphere. So we are looking now at development and change from a total different perspective. And theory of dependency represent actually this perspective. So we can go to the next slide, slide 9, where we can explain the theory of dependency. Yeah. So this theory of dependency from the perspective of interaction, yeah, see that the relationships of the center, for example, the rich countries, yeah, and the poor countries, like Indonesia, for example, yeah, are characterized by dependency and exploitative relationship. Yeah. So this theory of dependency see the world in two halves. Yeah? You have the rich industrial countries, which determine the center, yeah? And then you have the poor, underdeveloped countries in the south that they call it the very. So, and the relationship between these two countries are a relationship of dependency, the dependency of the southern countries toward the northern countries, yeah, and a relationship of exploitation of the southern countries by the northern countries. What is now interesting is that this dependency relationship is difficult to end because the center, the elite in the center, elite in the developed countries, in the industrial developed countries, like elite in the United States, in Britain, in Germany, in Japan, yeah, has the same interest, has the same common interest with the elite in the in the southern countries, the elite in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Thailand, in Congo, for example, in Nigeria. So this common interest between the elites of the center countries and the elites in the very countries that make that the dependency relationship is very difficult to break, because both elites has the interest to exploit the poorer half of the people in the very. Yeah. So if you see the picture on the right, you see the very country. It's divided in two halves. Yeah? The upper half is the center of the very, the elite of the society in the very, and under half the the other half, yeah, is the very of the very, the poor people, the exploited people in the very. And so this common interest between the elites in the center and the elite in the very make this relationship difficult to break. Yeah? And what is more, the exploited people in the center, for example, the workers in the United States, the workers in Germany, the workers in Britain, doesn't have the same interest with the exploited mass in the southern countries, in the very of the very. Because if this dependency relationships goes very smooth, and so the exploitation from the southern countries by the north goes very profitable, the workers in the industrial countries get also more. So they get also more income, a better life, because of this exploitation. So there is no interest of the workers in the industrial countries to have a solidarity with the poorer masses, the exploited masses in the southern countries. So while both elite has the same interest, both exploited people in the center and the periphery doesn't have the same interest. This situation made that this dependency relation is very strong. It's very difficult to break, especially when it is already global. So this is how the theory of dependency look at social change and development. Yeah, that is the perspective of relationship. So, the perspective of interaction. I mean, not relationship. It is how the perspective of interaction look at the development and social change. So both perspective has there is an enormous gap actually in looking at the reality. Yeah? But what is interesting with the modernization theory is that it focus on the society, inside the society. So people from the modernization theory make much effort, research on processes within the society, very detailed processes, studies on very detailed processes in inside the society in most cases in underdeveloped country to see how it developed. Yeah. On the other side, the dependency theory study more the global level, at the global level, how countries interact with others, how this dependency relationship develop. Yeah. So both focus on different levels. Both has its merits, of course. Yeah. The modernization theory, because it studied very detailed within the society, and dependency theory study focus its study on global level. In my opinion, if we look at slide number 10, we can take advantage of this both theories, yeah, both perspective. Yeah. We can use the detailed studies of societies, many aspects of societies from the modernization theory, and then we can also use the global perspective or dependency theory. Yeah. But within a context, yeah, the context of dependency theory is more relevant, yeah, because you see in reality this domination, yeah, of industrial countries toward the less developed countries in the world. You see this domination, but maybe not as simple as the theory of dependency at see it. Yeah. So um, we can use both theories, yeah, for our better understanding of the processes that happen in our world. Okay, that is about the process perspective and the interaction perspective. So we can go to the next subtopic, globalization. Yeah, we can go to the slide 12, globalization and globalization. We will look at what is meant with globalization. Globalization as a goal is an effort to shape the world according to a principle that the world and its resources are a free market economy, yeah, which is globally managed by giant political and financial institutions and by economic and political elite that is in most cases unaccountable. Yeah. You don't see this important institution and people that actually control the whole um, uh, what this globalization. Yeah. Uh, Actually, a situation that is dominated by these giant political and financial institutions, like, for example, multinational corporations, yeah, and big international institutions, like, for example, the WTO, United Nations, etc., etc. There is another description of globalization that look at it from a slightly different angle, you know, different angle, um, that say that globalization is about connectivity of the world, is increasingly greater in the network and commodity chain to supply consumption need of consumers who live far away from locations where the consumer goods are planned and produced. So it's actually not a very good construction, yeah, of the sentences, but okay, it emphasizes actually the connectiveness, yeah, of the processes of production and distribution, yeah, connectiveness of the distribution of raw material, of production processes, yeah, and the distribution of product from the industry, yeah, to the whole world. Yeah. It connects people and countries. It connects um, what they call commodity chains, for example, yeah, market chains. Yeah. It connects all people into one network. Yeah. As an example, you can see it in the slide 13. Yeah. Slide 13 that describe actually the connectivities um, in producing shoes, for example. The shoes is produced in Indonesia, but you can see the whole network of supplying of raw material, you know, and the whole network of distribution in North America and Europe. Yeah. Uh, to produce these shoes in Indonesia, you can see how many countries is involved in it. Yeah, that deliver raw material, different kind of raw material and side products. Yeah, and the whole chains of distribution. Yeah. This depicts actually in a very narrow sense the globalization. You can imagine that each part will receive money from the shoes, yeah, but you can assume that the biggest part will go to the bosses, yeah, in North America and in Europe. Yeah. Okay, that is globalization. Yeah, and we go further to slide 14 to um, to see the scenarios that is scenario of globalization and glocalization by Ulf Hanners, which is quite interesting. Yeah, here the scenarios goes more on the spreading and the influence of culture. Yeah, but it's quite interesting. Yeah, to for discussion actually. So he see that there are four scenarios of process of globalization, how globalization takes form. Yeah. The first is global homogenization scenario. Uh, Here he talked about total domination of Western culture, where the whole world is become a replica of Western lifestyle, in consumer goods, food, cars, films, theater, yeah, media, music, etc., etc. So the whole world become a replica of the Western world. That is the scenario of global homogenization. The second scenario is saturation scenario. It is actually the first scenario, but with a time dimension. So this homogenization of the world happens in a long evolution period, long evolution process. Yeah. And the third scenario is peripheral corruption scenario. This is a scenario that see globalization in a more complex form. Yeah. It doesn't assume that the world become a homogeneous one, yeah, because the process of exporting and importing um, cultural traits, cultural elements, yeah, is going through quite a complex process. Yeah. In one side, at the delivery side, you know, the developed industrial countries, they exported certain cultural elements, not all, but certain cultural elements. One easy example is, for example, they only export the B category films, films which is not so good. So we never look at, we never got the best product of the best. We just get the secondary and the tertiary quality cultural products of the best. So, and from the receiving side, there is a selection mechanism, yeah, that only select cultural products from the West that fits with the interest and the local cultural and social condition. Yeah. In this way, you don't get a homogeneous world, yeah, but you get a different kind of combination of countries with different cultures, depend on the local scene, depend on the local situation. For example, democracy that is imported from the West is adapted to the local political structure and political culture. You know? From a substantive democracy, it become more just political democracy, full of corruption, nepotism, and that kind of things, for example. You know? Equality become nepotism, for example. So you see here a more complex scenario of process of globalization. So the fourth, the last is a maturation scenario. A maturation scenario that is also a more complex, but a total different way, different processes. Yeah? It is more positive and optimistic scenario in compare with the third scenario. So it sees this last scenario sees the flow of culture goes more reciprocal, not only from the industrial countries to the less developed countries, but also the other way around. So there is a kind of a communication, yeah, more horizontal communication between many nations, many countries. Yeah? Um, and above that, there are in each country there are agents that reinterpret the coming cultural influence. that reinterpret according to the existing culture and the existing social structure. Yeah? This process stimulate creativity. So in this context, local forms and cultural values bloom and develop and are enriched, not become a replica of the West, for example, but it become enriched actually. Yeah? So what comes from this process of globalization is not domination of Western culture, and also not what like a peripheral corruption scenario, you know, where what we get is only the rubbish from the Western countries, yeah? But kind of a cultural hybridization, synthesis, cultural globalization. Yeah. So it's interesting for you to discuss actually what is now happen in your country, in my country, and how to develop it into a more substantive, more relevant process that that is beneficial not for the elites only, not for the urban elites only, but for the whole society. Yeah? Um, that's why, for example, this maturation scenario is interesting. But of course, it needs certain basic assumptions, certain requirements, yeah, to be happen, to can develop like a maturation scenario. It doesn't fall from the sky, of course. It has certain persyaratan, ya, certain requisites, yeah, requirements. Like for example, through a more how do you call it? A more egalitarian structure, yeah? More democracy, not too large gap between the elite and the masses, that kind of things, like those kind of pre-requirements. Yeah? So, but it's interesting for you to discuss these scenarios. Okay, we come to the last sub topic, which is development. Yeah? So we go to slide 16. Definition of development. So in development is a word which is translated to Indonesian, for example. I don't know, in Malaysia, you know, Malaysia use English as almost mother tongue. Yeah, people translated development into pembangunan in Indonesia, which is actually not a good translation. Yeah. Development is more neutral, of course, yeah, and pembangunan is not neutral at all. It is very political. You know? So the definition that what you see here in slide 16 is actually definition of pembangunan. Okay, so what is it? Yeah? So pembangunan of development is defined as a large social change from one level of welfare to the next level that is valued higher. So we remember then the perspective of process here, the perspective of social change, which is from the perspective of process. Yeah? Large social change from a level of welfare to the next level that is valued higher. Yeah? Even more specific, development or pembangunan, yeah, is an effort or a series of planned growth and change carried out consciously by a nation, state, and government towards modernization in order to build the nation, nation building. So it's more specifically, and it sounds very from the perspective of process. Yeah. So from the perspective of modernization. And development is, of course, a term of pembangunan, a term that is used by the theory of modernization. And it is used quite differently from the perspective of the theory of dependency. So we can say that development, the concept, planning, degree of citizen involvement in it, and its practices, yeah, cannot be separated from the structure of society, of course, from the interaction between countries. Everybody know about aid, aid from the rich country to the poor countries, for example. Yeah. But also trade relations, investment, investment from the West to the less developed countries, etc., etc. So there is interaction between countries there. And between regions, you have the ASEAN, for example. All those cannot be separated from the process of development, of the idea of development. So scientists and observers analyze development in its various aspects through various approaches from various perspectives. From synchronous or from diachronic perspective. We already talked about synchronic and diachronic perspectives, but also by utilizing the different perspectives, from the perspective of modernization theory or from the perspective of dependency theory. So both perspectives give a different picture of this development. Okay, so it is good to connect the subtopic of development, with the subtopic of different perspectives to see social change and development, and then also related to the subtopic of globalization. Okay, and the last slides actually demonstrate the indicators that is used mostly by the perspective of process, from the perspective of modernization theory, to measure development, to look whether development goes to the right direction, whether development is already achieved, how far it is achieved. So you have different indicators for that. One indicator in slide 17 is the Your Better Life Indication Index from the OECD from 2011. So it is already how do you call it? A better format of indicators in compare with the in the past one that only focus on economic growth. Economic growth as indicators of development. And this one from 2011 is a better one because it focuses on better indicators, indicators that can better measure the development because it focuses on real indicators that matters actually. You can look at it. It is not only economic growth, but it talks about housing too, about job creation, about community development, education, sanitation. So if you measure only the economic growth in big numbers, then you don't know whether this economic growth is good distributed, is distributed rightly and justly within the society. Now, these indicators will measure that much better because they are talking about sanitation. Does the people have good sanitation? Is the environment intact and not degraded? How is it with the health? How is it with the health services in the country? Now with this pandemic, with the COVID, we suddenly we see the quality of our health services. United States, as one of the richest country in the world, suddenly become aware that their public health services is actually very poor, not prepared to confront this kind of disasters. And disasters, this kind of disasters, the most part of society that gets the negative impact of these disasters is the poor people. And especially for these poor people, the health services are very bad. But you see also, of course, in other countries, like Indonesia, for example, job satisfaction, security, the feeling of security. Can I assume that 1 year in the future that I have enough income to educate my children, for example, to have a good life with different standards, of course. So security is very important. And balance of job and life. Do I have to work 18 hours a day to have just a basic living? Or I can work only eight hours and have a good living, for example. This kind of indicators are more relevant, of course, than only economic data. So it is already a better quality of indicators. In the slide 18 and 19, you see the indicators and different indicators. Actually, it's not an indicators, but goals, actually. Goals where we have to go, to plan our society to reach these goals. You have 17 of these goals. So that is partly indicator and partly goals, or goals that you can also use as indicators. No poverty, zero hunger, but that zero hunger is a goal, it's an objective, but it can also become an indicator. Do we have still hunger in our society, for example? Good health and well-being, quality of education, gender equality. Is there gender equality already? Maybe in the law, both gender is the same, but in the reality, in the society, do we see it? Clean water and sanitation. So back to gender inequality, for example, this pandemic creates people are staying home, for example, and that create frustration. And in many cases, women are the victim of this frustration. So house violence, between men and women within the household increased. Yeah, clean water, sanitation, uh, affordable clean energy, etc., etc. You can look yourself and discuss whether we go into the right direction to achieve these goals, for example. It become also an indicators. Okay, and yeah, these three last slides are last of our course, and you can use it. You can use it to discuss with yourself, with friends, with others, and with the assistant, with me too, if you want, um, use these indicators, goals, to discuss the conditions of your own society, of your own country, uh, and then you can also focus on certain goals only. You cannot cover all the 17 goals, of course, but you can also focus on one of a couple of goals that seems better connected to each other, closer connected. Like, for example, environment, clean energy, like that, for example, and water, life below water, the quality of the biotic in the seas. Those are connected with each other. You can um focus your study and your study on those goals. Okay, I guess I stop here, and we can further discuss if there is questions not only of this last part, but also of the first three subtopics if you want. Okay, Vera, I stop
Yeah.
here, and maybe
Yeah.
we'll start discussing if there is still time. Thank
Okay.
you very much,
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah. Thank you, Pak Satyawan, for your lecturing today about social change and development. We see many topics related today, because pandemic, we facing the social change. Okay, for all of you, of my students here, anyone who share the opinion or questions, please, you can type or ask directly to Pak Satyawan. Okay.
Okay, guys, fire your questions or problems, or maybe you have your own ideas about certain subjects or themes. Please don't hesitate.
Yep. The assistant, Dian, you are still here? You're still there? Last week you asked question to Pak Awan. Chesa or Natalie? Aisha? Please, if you have your opinion. Neil?
Students sometimes write also, yeah, in the,
Yeah.
I can, there is still no comment.
No question. Yeah.
No, in the chat, there is still no comments.
Yeah, Natalie, no question for me, Bu. Yeah, from Natalie.
No question for me. From me or for me. I can question something to Natalie. Hey, Natalie Leon.
Yeah, you can ask her, sir, because she very understand about your lecturer.
So if you don't have question, I have question.
It would be great, sir. Maybe you can provide one or two questions for them.
We can go to the globalization scenarios. You know? Wait a minute. Yeah, at slides 14.
Yep.
Slides 14. I will ask Natalie. Yeah.
Natalie, yeah.
Hey, Natalie, do you hear me? Hello. Yes. Okay. We saw here four scenarios. Yeah. If you look at your own society, you know, which scenario that is more fit for your not more fit as an ideal, yeah, but as a real processes in your country. Which scenario fits better to what is happening in your own country now? Maturation scenario is the ideal one, yeah. I don't know. Do you think that that this ideal situation really happen in your country?
Natalie?
Or other people, other students
Yeah.
can also join, yeah?
Yeah.
Maybe it's a very hypocritical answer, yeah? Come on. Be more brave. Maybe other students can join, yeah? Please, your opinion. Look, one comment from me, yeah, about this, yeah. If you see such scenarios, yeah, if you see such scenarios, you have to see it more like a ideal model, yeah, ideal model, ideal model to measure the real situation. Yeah.
Sir, sorry.
Okay.
Natalie, answer?
Afin, maybe the culture of tradition of different culture. Oh, it goes very fast. I cannot read it.
The Natalie answer that their language
For
own
example,
style, Malaysian style.
no, it's okay. But I have to go to the chat room. For example, in our language, we have our own style or habits in communication. Okay, in your opinion, this is part of this maturation scenario that local the local people of Malaysian, they reinterpret the influence from outside with their own way. Yeah, it is reflected in the use of language, for example. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. But I ask you, for example, English of Malaysian English. Yeah, how broad it is distributed within the society in Malaysia. Yeah? Does it produce, for example, does it produce gaps between the urban and the rural, between the educated and the non-educated, for example? Yeah? I was in Malaysia, well, almost 30 years ago. Yeah? At that time, the academician doesn't talk Malay. The academician talk English. So English become the language of the schoolers. Does it make a gap between the schoolers, the academician, and the lay people, the common people? Yeah? Those questions you have to think also about. So from Pavin, maybe the culture and tradition of different culture in a same place, more cultural elements. Wait a minute. Maybe the culture and tradition of different culture in the same place.
Maybe the culture and tradition.
Yeah, you mean a plurality of the typical plurality of Malaysia, for example. Yeah, that is okay. That each ethnic group preserve their own culture and tradition. Yeah, that's also not something quite good. Yeah, you see also in Indonesia where tradition and ethnic culture is still preserved. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Is there uh, other ideas? Yeah, but please look also in different look also different aspect of life. Yeah, so not only culture, not only tradition. Yeah, but also into the economic, to the politics. Yeah. Uh, so, for example, how come? But it's a very quite sensitive also, yeah? But we are in the academic world, so we can talk about more sensitive things. Yeah, corruption, for example. The former prime minister of Malaysia and his wife, according to international media, can amass such richness, and corruption. So how can that happen? Yeah, like that, for example. That is a question, serious question, actually. Yeah, that is not only a phenomenon in Malaysia. You know, in Indonesia, maybe it is even bigger, even more serious. But that is partly the combination of democracy, rights, what civil rights, but also how this kind of systems become appropriated by the elite for their own interests, for example. That is also part of our globalization. Corruption in the past cannot be as big as now, because now the source of corruption goes beyond countries the perbatasan, countries
Boundaries.
beyond countries. It is take a global dimension. You know? If you look, wait a minute, in Al Jazeera or in BBC, I guess in Al Jazeera, Shadow Wars, you know, the documentary Shadow Wars is very interesting. How corruption in the field of weapon trade, that is enormous, enormous. But it's okay.